All right, week 6 is here. We got Jmtowin from 1 week season to walk us through this week 6 slate. Lots of interesting angles to consider. We're going to give you guys everything you need to climb to the top of the leaderboards in week 6. It's the block party with Pete and JM. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crack spot, bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
So, Jam, I got to let you know right out of the gate, you probably didn't realize this happened. I made a mistake when I set up this event. I accidentally set it for an hour early at 1 p.m. And so then I started getting some ping notifications, and I went and saw there was 100 people waiting. I was at 1:15. I had gone out to the park with April and Lauren. We were having lunch, and everyone's like, where's the show? People were wondering, can JM not find his clothes? This was a message from almost an hour ago. So I apologize. This was not on JM. This was on me misscheduling this.
My clothes. Hey, by the way, what do you wear for pants when you do your shows?
It's funny you say that because normally I'm just like wearing shorts or sweatpants or joggers or something, but I actually have like nice, on today because we went. But no, it was like a nice fall day. Went to the park, went and had some lunch outside. I decided to be a presentable human being today.
I like it.
What about you? Show us your pants, Jam.
I don't think I can. My pants are slightly pornographic, so
well, I mean, come on, now you have to.
I don't think I can. I really can't. Okay.
Show me a tease.
I don't think I can stand up high enough. They're like yoga pants.
Oh, and, okay. Come on. I thought that was going to be far worse than that.
No. So
you were naked or something.
My son would have these like these ribbed pants when he was like 2 years old, like these ribbed leggings. And I was like, dude, those are so comfortable. Like those look so comfortable. And then I was like, I wonder if anyone makes those for adult men. And I found some woman in Lithuania on Etsy who makes like merino wool ribbed yoga pants. And on my Friday show days, I wear my ribbed yoga pants because they're just super cozy. And I can't really go out of the house in them, but they work for the shows.
That's incredible. I do like the Lululemon joggers. Those are very comfy pants, but I'll have to check out these ribbed yoga pants. You'll have to.
I'll send you a link. I think it's like $230 a pair, but well worth it.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into it because I realized even last week, we got a lot of ground to cover in an hour. What we do on the show, we do a quick reflection on the previous week, any lessons learned, any things we can take away moving forward. Then we'll do a quick macro overview of this week's slate. Lots of injury news, even funneling in here just in the past hour that is going to change things a bit. And then we'll go a little bit position by position and, of course, wrap up by building a lineup on DraftKings where we'll use one of JM's favorite building blocks or a couple of them from the week. You will need to become OWS subs to get the rest of the building blocks, all of JM's player grid. You can get access to that 30% off with promo code PETE30. And we will talk about some of the offerings this week on OWS as we continue. But JM, real quick before we look forward, did you enjoy Ja'Marr Chase explosion week or were you watching from the outside in on that one?
I had 12% Ja'Marr Chase, which is a number I heading into the week and coming out of the week I felt comfortable with, knowing that it was underweight the field, but also knowing I gave myself enough shots on goal for that to end up on the right roster if he hit for the type of game he hit for. And actually, everybody kind of missed quarterbacks last week for the most part. So I didn't really hit quarterbacks, but that didn't set me back. It was a weird week, though, in that outside of quarterback, I didn't really miss anything. I had everything that hit, had high exposure to a lot of the things that hit, but it somehow managed to cash 3 out of 150 rosters in the slant. So it was like by far my worst week in the last year of DFS play. What about you?
This was one of those weird weeks. I explained it on my portfolio review show where I loved my lineup that I put in play. And I actually had a phrase from your write-up in the scroll in my head because I was able to get in all of the plays I wanted, Achane and Tyreek Hill. I got in Tyreek or I got in Travis Kelce, I got in Garrett Wilson, I got DeAndre Swift in. And what I needed to do to unlock that was a Danny Dimes stack, a Danny Dimes, Wan'Dale Robinson stack. And a wise man once said he can either win you a tournament or crater your lineup. Spoiler alert, JM, he did crater my lineup, but I felt really good about the team I had though this week.
Yeah, I had like 44% Achane, I had 44% Tyreek Hill. Like I said, my 12% Chase, and kind of all the guys who hit, I had them maybe not at as high of a level as I should have. But yeah, it was also one of those weeks where it only takes one roster, right? One roster in the right place makes your whole week kind of great. And it was just one of those weeks where nothing lined up, where none of my rosters lined up. So I had no shot at even picking out one best roster that could have made me money. So I was due for a week like that. I felt good about my play. There's a couple of mistakes I made in terms of process throughout the week, but felt good about my play. And it was actually the easiest week to move on from in terms of like I've had one down week, 3 profitable weeks, 2 really good weeks in there. And even those like really good weeks were a little bit harder to move on from just because I was thinking about like, okay, what could I have done differently? What did I learn from this? This last week was kind of like, oh, well, like there wasn't that much for me to learn from it. It just didn't happen for me.
Yeah, I think the Chase thing, like looking back for me is, there are lessons to be learned there is I have a hard time, when there is legit, input volatility or question marks around the situation. Is Joe Burrow fully healthy? Is this Bengals team kind of broken right now? I'm willing to take on that kind of risk if everyone else is ignoring it. But like Jamar Chase was incredibly popular. Joe Mixon was incredibly popular. And it was like, man, I feel like this is a more fragile situation than the field's accounting for. So that kind of pushed me away from there. I used the Cardinals defense in my main team. I even saw Hilo, who I think took a pretty heavy stance trying to fade that angle as well. And so I don't really have regrets from it, but it does sting when you miss out on the 50-point week for sure.
Yeah. When you miss out on a 50-point week, it like I'll remember 3 years from now that, and again, I didn't like fully miss out on it, but I missed out on it. I'll remember 3 years from now that I missed out on it. I was at a Patriots game 3 or 4 years ago in the DraftKings suite, and Julio Jones had a 50-point game and I didn't have him. I was like single entry or 3 entry player at the time and didn't have him. And like everyone around me was like celebrating every time he scored a touchdown on the screen, and you're like, you still remember those 50-point weeks that you didn't have. But yeah, I mean, it's like you said, when it's a fragile situation, you want to be overweight if everybody's off of it. You want to be underweight if everybody's on it. And if you're playing one lineup, then that's sharp strategy to just be like, all right, I'm not going to be on it, right? It's not a bad play. It just didn't work out that particular week.
Yep. Let's set our sights on week 6 now. All kinds of moving parts here. I'll pull up the Fantasy Life Game Hub that I like to get up here just to kind of give us a quick overview of things. Not a ton of high totals this week, and a lot of the totals are on the backs of big team totals. Miami Dolphins implied for almost 30 points or over 30 points. The Rams implied for a ton against the Cardinals here. What is kind of your macro overview of this week 6 slate?
Macro overview has really been painted for me based on as my player pool has come together. I have 5 quarterbacks in my real player pool. And that doesn't mean that my MME pool won't have a few more, but I have 5 guys in my player pool. I have a pretty limited running back pool, and then I have a pretty broad wide receiver pool, which typically, if I'm narrow at quarterback, I'm going to be narrow in the pass catcher spots. But this is sort of a week where there are a lot of attractive pass catchers, not as many attractive quarterbacks. And that makes sense when you look at the game totals, where you've got Miami at 30, 31, wherever they're at right now. And the Rams in this 4 touchdown range, and then everybody else, 25, below 25 implied points. It makes sense that there wouldn't be that many quarterbacks standing out, but then there can still be individual wide receivers who could go for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, or can significantly outperform their salary, whatever the case might be. And then running back is interesting because we have Christian McCaffrey, and sure, you can play him, but he's playing the Browns. So Christian McCaffrey playing the Browns, and then like this huge pricing gap. And then, yeah, you've got Chuba Hubbard, and potentially you have the Cardinals backs, depending on if Keontae Ingram doesn't play, then Amari DeMarcado is very interesting as well. If Keontae Ingram plays, we probably get like a split backfield, and what are the chances of one of them scoring 25 plus points? Pretty low. Chuba Hubbard's best career game is 21.4 DraftKings points, and he's had like the full backfield to himself plenty of times. So it's not like you expect him to blow up for a 25 pointer. It's more about the salary savings. So you kind of have this like 6.1K to 7.2, or if you like David Montgomery, 7.3K range. So I'm not necessarily going out of my way to strategically build my rosters differently from salary allocation. I'm not going to say, hey, most people will have, maybe a lot of people will end up with Chuba Hubbard, and then I will be different because I'll be more in that 6K range. But it's not like if everybody were in that 6K range, it's not like I'd be like, okay, I'm going to do something different and get off these running backs, because running back is the most highly predictable position, and that's where the best plays are. And then, just kind of, quarterback is also interesting, right? No Lamar, no Mahomes, no Herbert, no Josh Allen. And so you have Jalen Hurts playing the Jets, and then you got this sort of big gap down to the other guys. It's kind of like Justin Fields and then the pocket passers, which, it's the pocket passers who sometimes move around a little bit, which is like the Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow and Matthew Stafford. And then to me, it's like, and then you got the cheap guys who actually run the ball some, which is Dobbs and Ritter. And that's sort of how I see this quarterback week shaking out.
Yeah, the other thing that's kind of interesting about this week is I feel like we don't have the marquee game that people are going to maybe want to gravitate to. Last week it was Minnesota and KC. The week before that it was Buffalo in Miami. Again, a lot of teams that are heavy favorites. Are there any, shootout games here? I guess my snap take is people are going to be excited about the Minnesota-Chicago game, just the Justin Fields, DJ Moore explosion. You got some value on Minnesota with Justin Jefferson removed. Are there any other like actual game environments that you think could maybe just massively exceed the implied total?
I think that this is a week where there are plays that will be popular, that will be somewhat high confidence to the field, and are actually lower confidence than the field realizes, and yet are still the highest confidence spots on the slate, if that makes sense. So like people are going to be excited, I think, about the Seattle and Cincinnati game. Yeah. Well, both teams are implied to score under 24 points. And so that's the median expectation. And so could it go above that? Yes. Will it go above that? Not at as high of a rate as the field will probably think. As in, like, that's the most attractive game of the bunch, or one of the most attractive games of the bunch. And so people will flock toward it, but it's good. It's one of the best on the slate, but it's not as good as ownership will say. Same thing with Minnesota, Chicago, where you remove Justin Jefferson. That's a lot of spillover, obviously, but it's also, it lowers the expectations for that offense as a whole. And so you have to account for that. And you have to account for the fact that Minnesota hasn't been bad on defense this year. I think they're 20th in pass defense DVOA, 16th in run defense DVOA. So sort of like middle of the pack, which with Brian Flores calling the shots, that's what you would expect. So I like that game. I like the Cincinnati game. I'm not saying I don't like those games, but I'm saying there's more paths to the downside than I think the field will realize. And yet they could still end up being the best games on the slate. So games that could be more interesting than the field might realize. And I haven't looked at ownership this week. It hasn't hit my process yet to need to look at that, but I don't expect that Washington, Atlanta will be super popular. Washington, has given up 30 plus points in 4 out of 5 games. 3 out of their 5 games have combined for 60 plus points. Obviously, Atlanta is not a shootout producer, but they can be in higher scoring games. So I think that spot is interesting. And and then it kind of comes down to, for me, like, well, and then obviously the Rams and Arizona is an interesting one. But then it kind of comes down to me of like, okay, but there's also some concentrated offenses that people might not be on. I thought this was really interesting. The let's say Zay Jones is out, which seems to be trending toward that. Kirk, Ridley, and Evan Ingram, their combined price is the exact same as Osborne, Addison, and Hawkinson. Furthermore, those 3 guys, so, you've heard me talk about this before, but pre-touchdown fantasy scoring, I won't get into all the reasons why that's valuable. I talk about it in the player grid this week. I actually talk about it in the very top write-up. So that part's free. Even if you're not a member, it's useful to go read that, I would say. But the pre-touchdown fantasy scoring, one of the most useful metrics we can use in understanding like the true value of players, those 3 Jags pieces, even with Zay Jones playing 2.5 games, whatever it's been, those 3 Jags pieces have about 37 pre-touchdown DraftKings points per game, which at their salary, that's pretty good for like a block of players. The Vikings, if you include Justin Jefferson, have like 45 pre-touchdown DraftKings points per game. So is yes, Justin Jefferson's gone. That usage spills over to these other guys. But does losing Justin Jefferson take away an extra 4 completions and 40 passing yards for Kirk Cousins? Like, doesn't that maybe lower that Vikings block to the same level as the Jags block? And I think that with Jefferson out, people will flock toward that Vikings block and maybe flock toward the Jags block a little bit less. So I say that to say, I like the Vikings block as in like, hey, you just take one of these 3 guys and put that on a bunch of your rosters. You're probably getting a good score in some spots, but the same goes for the Jags. And I don't think as many people will be looking at that one in the same way. So just some interesting components where this week sets up, throws different things at us than we typically have. And so makes it kind of fun because we can play around with some new things that we don't typically play around with.
Yeah, I love hearing some of the things you're talking about. That I did my regular piece that I write for Fantasy Life, Hidden Gems, mainly focused for the Battle Royale contest, but who are our badge bros, scroll the F down plays for, and did highlight the Washington stack with Sam Howell and Logan Thomas. Now, Washington highest pass rate over expectation in the league. Sam Howell, 51 attempts last week, 41 the week before, and then Logan Thomas coming off an 11 target game. And then my other hidden gem in that article is Christian Kirk, who has a larger target share than Calvin Ridley on the year and is definitely going overlooked, and love his price tag in DFS this week as well. So sounds like we're on the same page with some of that stuff. Why don't we transition now into talking about quarterback here? You mentioned you have a fairly narrow pool at quarterback. Like you said, at the top, 8,200 Jalen Hurts. And then it seems really spread out. I'm kind of like you. I haven't looked much at ownership this week. It does seem like Stafford and Trevor Lawrence will be decently popular. And then other than that, just completely wide open. So where are you leaning at quarterback for week 6?
So with the Hurts situation, the first thing I want to ask is, like, can he put up 35 plus points? Well, obviously he can, but I want to sort of assess that, because if he puts up 25, 27, 30, great for everybody who rosters him, but I bet I can get that score for less in salary. So Hurts won't be in kind of my core pool, or, it's Friday. I don't expect Hurts to be in my core pool. And so then that kind of sends me down to who are the guys who can score in that 25 to 30 point range with potential to exceed that 25 to 30 point range. So Justin Fields, really the core guy who can exceed that 25 to 30 point range. And then you get down, like I said, you get down to the pocket passers with some level of mobility. The Buccaneers, man, the Buccaneers have been top pass defense this year, been lights out against the pass this year. So Jared Goff on the road against them, not really a place that I'm gravitating toward. Trevor Lawrence, never going to argue against him, fight against him. You go through his game logs from, the start of the Doug Peterson era, even, like, he doesn't have the ceiling that people think of him having, primarily because they do a lot of short area passing. They don't throw downfield like at a high rate. So Trevor Lawrence not standing out to me as much as Joe Burrow and Matthew Stafford. So those are kind of the two guys in that category that I'm most focused on. And then again, and I might have like some trailing Geno Smith opposite my Joe Burrow. I have my Joe Burrow core of builds, but then also have some Geno Smith. And then the other group is, again, those cheap running quarterbacks. So Josh Dobbs, Desmond Ridder. You mentioned Sam Howell. I'm also thinking about that Washington side as it relates to the Falcons, in that it's easier to pass on Washington than it is to run against them. And this Eric Bieniemy Washington offense is very aggressive. They're passing the ball a lot. They're trying to score points. So you don't end up in this situation where you think of Washington and Atlanta in the context of, say, last year, and it's like, oh, this is kind of a more grinded out game and both teams are trying to bleed the clock. But Washington is like, hey, we're going to get the ball, we're going to attack. And so that opens opportunity for Washington to score, and this to become a game where Desmond Ridder, the home hero, is throwing the ball a little bit more. And we saw last week, Houston, bad run defense, good pass defense, but they completely sold out to stop the run last week. They said, we're going to force Desmond Ridder to beat us. And he was able to do that. He looked really good throwing the ball, running around. And so, it's an interesting spot to take advantage of that situation where I don't think many people will want to go to Desmond Ridder this week. So Ridder and Dobbs are kind of these cheap guys who have some designed runs and have some passing chops as well.
You mentioned a lot of the cheap guys. I guess the other one we should probably hit on, obviously, Anthony Richardson out. Decent game environment here. Any love for Gardner Minshew at 5K?
Yeah, always happy to play Gardner Minshew. Last year he provided 2 100-yard games for Devontae Smith, and I believe it was a 100-yard game and like a 90-yard game for AJ Brown in I think it was 2 starts. Like, so he's capable of producing for his wide receivers. The Colts passing attack is designed, they have different pieces and therefore different strengths they're building around than the Eagles. So it's going to be a lot more short area passing, because that's what Michael Pittman is good at, is getting open in the short areas. That's what Josh Downs is good at, is getting open in the short areas. So harder for Minshew to pile up 300 passing yards. And then, he might take off and run, but he's more going to scramble around and throw the ball. So I think he has 4 rush attempts on the year and like 2.5 games worth of play. So Minshew needs more to go right than Ritter or Dobbs. So because of that, I kind of have Dobbs and Ritter above him, but he was kind of a close call in making it into my tighter pool. And again, it's Friday, things could expand. Mac Jones is another one in that same category where who is going to want to play Mac Jones? No. Who has Mac Jones played the last few weeks? Well, he's played New Orleans, which is, I think, they're 7th in pass defense DVOA. He's played Dallas. He's played the Jets, but looked decent against Miami, looked good against Philadelphia. And now there's all this talk about Bill Belichick's going to get fired. What better time for Mac Jones to have a good game than against the Raiders defense? So I can't quite, the thing with Mac Jones is you got to get it right. Not only do the Patriots have to have a good game, which is already a lot has to go right for that. Then it has to be through the air instead of on the ground, or the touchdowns have to be through the air. And then you have to guess the right person to pair him with out of like a team that spreads the ball around. So it's harder to get, like, to really capitalize on getting that bet correct. But it is an interesting bet in large field play. And it's another one I'll throw out there kind of alongside these cheap guys. I'll definitely have a little bit of Mac Jones in large field play. I'll be surprised if he makes my single entry 3 max cut among like the 8 to 12 rosters I'm using there, but he's interesting. So yeah, like there's other guys in this cheap range that I wouldn't necessarily argue against, but I kind of prefer these guys who have the rushing upside, just because if I'm searching for ceiling, it's likeliest to come from those types of guys.
Yeah, now kind of just getting my bearings at the position. And I was kind of looking over at some of the more just popular running back and wide receiver plays. And you're seeing both of the Bengals, again, Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase. So I think that is going to naturally flow some more exposure to Joe Burrow. And then you are seeing 3 of the Jags up there, ETN, Christian Kirk, and Evan Ingram, all looking like popular plays, which I have a feeling will result in Trevor Lawrence being really popular. And so then if you create that dynamic where we don't have a ton of guys on the really high end elite side, you have a lot of people funneling towards these mid-tier popular guys, it does initially make me want to gravitate to some of these cheaper guys, because you're getting the salary relief and not the same ownership either, and probably not sacrificing as much ceiling as maybe the field is implying.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can get a running quarterback at low ownership, Dobbs has put up a 23-pointer and a 25-pointer, I think it is, in tough matchups, and Ritter's put up a 22-pointer and a 29-pointer. And yeah, like the range of it's Daniel Jones, but less extreme, right? The range of outcomes is that they're probably going to bomb a little bit more often, but when they hit, they can hit at that high enough level to really help win you a tournament. We always talk about, hey, find the guys who run, because those extra rushing points are so valuable. And then on a week like this, everyone's like, well, the guys who run are a little bit more questionable in terms of the risk you're taking on, so we'll just avoid them. And so yeah, from my standpoint, I really like setups like that, because I can grab these potentially slate winners, at much lower ownership than they should have.
Did you have any thoughts on what happened to Dobbs last week? Because he had 3 straight games where he had 41 yards rushing, 55 yards rushing, 48, and then only had 1 yard rushing. Obviously they were having trouble with Cincy on the whole, but I assume you think that was maybe more of an aberration than him just fully regressing. Yeah,
absolutely. And when we have one game like that, on a guy who we already had negative connotations around him as a player heading into the season, it can be easy to then just assume that people don't latch on to the 25, 17, 23 and say, this is who Josh Dobbs is, right? Because we have a lot of negativity around, hey, this guy's a career back. We have to climb over that negativity first before we can embrace him as a good play. So then when he has the one bad game like this, we embrace that. We're like, this is who he really is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was not a good game for Arizona as a whole. Cincinnati started the year poorly on defense. They're still bad against the run, and they were getting gashed by Arizona before James Conner got hurt. But Lou Anarumo is a great defensive coordinator and is typically able to put things together that take away what an offense wants to do through the air primarily. Anarumo's first year as defensive coordinator, we would track like what the alpha option on each opponent had done. And there was like people thought of Lou Anarumo as like a backup plan defensive coordinator for the Bengals that year. And I was criticized by some sharp people for saying that Lou Anarumo was a really good defensive coordinator. And we tracked it that year on OWS where it was like week in and week out, the alpha options against the Bengals finished way below their typical expectations. So he gave them fits. And then the game played out in a way where, Arizona was in control. And I forget exactly what it was that happened, but it was like toward the end of the first half, there was a turnover and then the Bengals scored and then the Bengals scored again. And all of a sudden the game started getting out of hand. So that game kind of got away from Arizona, but I wouldn't necessarily expect that to be a consistent thing. And I think we see plenty more, 20, 25 point games from Dobbs as we move forward this year.
Let's transition over to running back. My kind of snap reaction to it is you got a lot of these guys in this mid-range, basically from 6,300 to 7,100. You got ETN, Kamara, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Kyron, Raheem Mostert. Those seem like some of the best plays, some of the most popular plays. You mentioned the price tag on CMC at 9,500. I don't love this spot, just this game environment on the road at Cleveland without Deshaun Watson. Obviously, CMC can get there in any which way, but what is kind of your high level thought on the running back position this week?
Yeah, I mean, high level is what we touched on already in terms of it's this 6K to 7K range is where I'm primarily focused. I don't think Chuba Hubbard's a bad play. I mean, he's a good play in terms of you save some salary, you get 12 to 16 points. The question is like, what does that sacrifice for your roster in terms of, is it better to save that salary there? Or can you get a cheap wide receiver who can outproduce that and do something better with your salary construction? So just in terms of like guys who can score 30 points. I'm focused in this range. The sort of clumped up nature of these guys is what sent me down. Every year I'll have 3 or 4 weeks in the season where I'll calculate a bunch of pre-touchdown fantasy points stuff. And it was the running back position that really sent me down that path this week. And so some interesting things pop up, right? Like Kenneth Walker. Well, actually, so I'll put this in context. Cooper Kupp, obviously outlier, but since the start of 2021, averaging 21.3 pre-touchdown DraftKings points per game. That's as high as you can get. Jamar Chase last year, 16.9. Devontae Adams, since he joined the Raiders, 17.3. Josh Jacobs last year, 16.1. So that gives you a sense of sort of, where some of these guys end up in pre-touchdown fantasy points. Kyron Williams, 12.5 so far this year. Pretty solid at the running back position. Bijan Robinson, 15.4 so far this year. Kenneth Walker, only 10.9 pre-touchdown DraftKings points per game in his career. And this is why we've seen him top 20 DraftKings points only 3 times in his career. So he tends to be popular when people don't know what to do. They tend to default to him. So he's a guy that I'm less high on than maybe the field might be. Travis Etienne, a guy I typically play at a much lower rate than the field. 8.2 pre-touchdown DraftKings points per game last year, 11.2 this year. So obviously we say all the time, like the 39-pointer he had last week, that's within his range of outcomes, but his typical game is going to be a lot lower than that. So Etienne's kind of an interesting case for me because his production tends to be concentrated on games. Like he'll have really bad games and really good games. So he's not totally off my list just because he's, hits at a lower rate than people realize, or has, a lower floor to springboard from than people realize. But he is kind of less high on my list than he will be for the field. So yeah, that kind of brings me. Oh, and then DeAndre Swift, and I'll lay this out because it's in the free part of the player grid. 17.7 pre-touchdown DraftKings points per game since he's been the starting running back for the Eagles. So these 4 games, obviously 4-game sample size is small, and we're talking that's above what Josh Jacobs did last year. That's above what Devontae Adams did last year. That's above what Jamar Chase did last year. So do I expect him to remain at that level? Probably not. But also it's not like there's been some outlier production or some situation where you're like, well, this is really distorting the numbers. This is a role for him with a skill set that he has in an offense that's capable of moving the ball and putting up points, that he should be priced kind of up in like the low 7Ks as opposed to the low 6Ks. So really like DeAndre Swift, really like Alvin Kamara, another guy who, just from the usage standpoint pops. Really like Mostert, although he's not going to top 20 touches. It's not like he's going to go out and just get all the carries.
Right.
If Jeff Wilson doesn't play this week, Savannah Ahmed's going to get some of the touches. Like he's going to get 16 to 20 touches, and there's a chance that he actually ends up with like 12, 13, 14, because that's what the Dolphins do. But and he had the one big pass game role, but typically he's going to have like 3 to 5 points through the air. Yet the matchup's great. Touchdown opportunities are there. So I like Mostert. I like Kyron Williams. I don't think his pass game role is going to be as big now that Cooper Kupp's back. But it's kind of this range that all of these guys are interesting. All of them are in play.
And just for people, and I think I know why, but when you talk about pre-touchdown points, my guess is what you're inferring is these are the people who are getting the volume, they're getting the usage that they can get there in various ways. Touchdowns are inherently volatile. And if you're paying for production that is just reliant on touchdowns, and the field is also paying for that at a high clip, that's a way to get burned in GPPs.
That's a great way to put it. Is touchdowns are volatile. We can pay attention to red zone usage, inside the 10 usage. We can pay attention to teams that are likely to score points than others. There are usage components that influence whether the touchdowns are real or not, but also touchdowns swing wildly across, moderate sized samples across full seasons. Touchdowns can swing pretty wildly. I think Mike Evans has a season of 2 touchdown catches and like seasons with as many as 12 to 14 touchdown catches. So you can see how touchdowns can really swing. And part of the DraftKings pricing algorithm seems to be reliant on ownership, and ownership goes to guys who have had good games recently. And so as the touchdown regression slides one way, where guys aren't scoring the touchdowns, their price goes down, their ownership goes down. Guys who have scored the touchdowns recently, their price goes up, their ownership goes up. So it's an opportunity to kind of really get Drake London in the 8 games, take away his 0-pointer this year, the 8 games Desmond Ridder has started, 12.2 pre-touchdown DraftKings points per game, which is more than DK Metcalf in the Geno Smith era, more than T. Higgins dating back to the start of last year, like more than a lot of these 6K wide receivers. Drake London sitting here at 4,800. And I think a lot of people will look at him like, I don't know if he's a good player or not. And it's like, man, like week in and week out, the usage floor is there. And if he spikes for one of those 2 touchdown games, all of a sudden, like the ceiling is so much higher than people realize. So yeah, it gives us a good sense of removing the noise a little bit more and kind of understanding more at their core, who from a usage standpoint is worth paying attention to at a higher level than maybe the price tags say, or than the field is going to pay attention to them.
How do you think about Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs? Because these are 2 guys where it looks like they're going to be very popular this week. The workload, you cannot poke any holes in it. I mean, they are getting rushing work. They're getting passing work. Joe Mixon got all these goal line carries last week. And yet I struggle with these players that I don't think are adding a lot outside of their workload, from an expected point standpoint, that are then going to be very popular. It's like, I want to get in on Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs when everyone's done with them and say, I don't want to touch these guys. But this is just the era of DFS now, where people are looking at usage, and it's like, hey, these guys are going to pop for a big game soon. How are you kind of reconciling that this week?
I remember one time Levitan saying to me, well, we're not scouts, if we lean too much on on the eye test, that can hurt us. But at the same time, there's some level of the eye test that can help us. I'm less concerned with Josh Jacobs. Don't love the matchup. Not that the Patriots defense is as scary as they were, but they're still not typically going to give up a monster game to a running back. But I like Jacobs this week. Mixon, it's like he had the game last year. What was it, week 9? The 50+ pointer, the 5 touchdown game. And every other game, it's been below 20 DraftKings points. I don't think he's cracked 20 DraftKings points in another game outside of that one, dating back to the start of last year. So like the Mixon thing, I am so immune to the noise on Mixon. Oh, Mixon's popular this week because it's happened, I don't know, 8 times, 10 times, 12 times since the start of last season. And every time it's like the usage. And it's like, okay, well, like good luck with that. And then, so the question I always ask is, can they bury me, right? Can he score enough points that I'm just like, oh my God, I needed to have Joe Mixon. Seattle's number 2 in run defense DVOA this year. Like, I don't see how suddenly Mixon goes for 35 points, because even if he scores 26, 27, and my running backs score 20, like I'm still not dead. There's still like plenty of opportunity for me to make up that ground. So yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at ownership. So I haven't looked at the noise. I did run some opto lineups in the Bink machine earlier this week just to see what it was spitting out and kind of get a sense. Saw Mixon in some of those, but it was like, man, if people want to play Mixon, good for them. And if I lose a week because of Mixon hitting, I'm okay with that. Even beyond the eye test, just like the efficiency advanced metrics they've been awful since the start of last year.
Two other running backs I want to touch on before we move to wide receiver. One being Deontay Foreman, who it looks like Roschon Johnson is trending to being out. Deontay Foreman, 4,400, would likely have that backfield mostly to himself. And then also I want to hit on Jonathan Taylor, who no one really wants to play after how the touch split went last week. But then you get the quotes this week, hey, we're going to ramp him up. Maybe with no more Anthony Richardson, there's some more rushing pie available there. Thoughts on Deontay Foreman and Jonathan Taylor?
No deep thoughts on Deontay Foreman yet. I've kind of left that alone, just waiting for injury news to shake out.
Yeah.
Again, I do want to think about raw points. So what are the chances I get a huge raw score? Not particularly high. And yet, he could be useful. So yeah, I'm not high on that play. I'm not down on that play. In terms of who's the other guy you just said?
Jonathan Taylor.
Jonathan Taylor. Yeah, I mean, you can't run on the Jags. You also couldn't run on the Ravens and you couldn't run on the Titans. All three of those teams are top 8 in run defense DVOA. And Zach Moss had big games on the ground against the Titans and Ravens. And there have been these plays where Zach Moss has this 20-yard gain, but you're like, man, if that was Jonathan Taylor, that's a touchdown. That's like a 60-yard touchdown. So Zach Moss has looked awesome, but Jonathan Taylor is even better. I do think that two things. I think that strategically, game theory wise, it's very sharp to be overweight the field Jonathan Taylor. I don't think it'll take a lot to be overweight the field Jonathan Taylor. At the same time, if we zoom out and we take our NFL knowledge and we say what's most likely to happen, here is like maybe it's a 50-50 split this week. I don't think that suddenly Jonathan Taylor gets 80% of the touches. And knowing Shane Steichen, I also don't think that I've kind of played around with this a lot this week of like, man, what if they just say, hey, we've got Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss and we combo punch and we do 35 carries throughout this game. But that's not really the Shane Steichen way. And so, I'm kind of like, I'm going to have some Jonathan Taylor, but he's not making like this is really sharp, tighter player pool.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Before we transition to wide receivers, want to let you guys know, again, you can get now, it used to be 20% off with promo code Pete, but now Inner Circle and OWS DFS, you can get 30% off with promo code Pete30. Like I say, every week, the scroll and so much of the content over at OWS is part of my process each week, getting ready for the slate. And of course, I am partial to checking out JM's player grid that populates famously after pizza night on Fridays.
Right before pizza night. Right before
pizza night. Okay. Yeah.
I'm on the West Coast, so that's like about 7:30, 7:45 on the East Coast. And just throwing it out there, as we always say, we're not trying to trap anybody in here. So check us out. And if you don't like us, ask for a refund. Week pass, we'll give you a refund. Season pass, we'll give you a refund. We're not for everybody because we do focus on, obviously we're focused on like who the top players are on the slate, but what we're really focused on is training you in how to be good DFS players. Some people don't want that. They just want the picks. So you'll know pretty quickly if we're kind of a fit for you or not, but at least come check us out and see. Also check out 1 Week Season on Twitter because they put a ton of awesome stuff out there every day. That's really deep, in-depth content and information that's useful and free.
Yep. And, when we build our lineup, we use multiple of the building blocks. One of the things I like about how JM lays it out, and you see here, it'll obviously populate later, but in the player grid where you get the building blocks, which for me are such this awesome idea generating piece that really kind of sends me on these different rabbit holes. And then you get to play with those pieces and see how these blocks potentially fit together. And then on top of that, then you do get his player pool for single entry and 3 max, which is always a good sanity check for me. Am I getting too far off the board here? What's JM working with in his tighter pool? So highly recommend doing that. And if you want just the 20% off, you can do the weekly pass. The promo code Pete will work on just the weekly pass if you want to check it out. If you're looking to take the bigger plunge, you can get the extra 10% off with Pete 30. Jam, let's now talk about the wide receiver position, which I would, contrast to the running back position this week as being pretty loaded. I mean, we got so many studs here capable of going for massive games. Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown. And that's before we even get into some of the secondary receivers like Puka and Jalen Waddle and all of that. So how are you feeling about the wide receiver slate for us here?
So kind of the guys I'm most focused on at the high end are Tyreek, Kupp, and Chase, but I'll have exposure, I'm sure, to Devontae Adams. I'll have exposure to AJ Brown, to Amon-Ra St. Brown, to kind of all these different pieces, because there's some interesting pieces across the board at the top, like you said. But yeah, that's where I'm primarily focused. And even Tyreek Hill, that's such an interesting spot because it's so easy to run on Carolina, so hard to pass on Carolina. But as we also know, the unique speed of the Dolphins is, we saw the Bills have a good pass defense. They slowed the Dolphins down. The Patriots have a good pass defense. They slowed the Dolphins down. But also those teams have seen this Dolphins offense multiple times. And so that's a different experience than seeing them in real time on the field for the first time, which the Panthers will be doing. So won't surprise me if the Panthers are able to keep the ball in front of them and kind of Tyreek Hill ends up in one of these 20-point type games. Also won't surprise me if Tyreek Hill scores 35 plus. So got to keep him in the player pool. I really like Cooper Kupp this week. Really like Jamar Chase, even if T. Higgins plays, just because he's going to be over-owned relative to his expectations, but he is still a good play. So that's kind of the places where I'm most focused up at the top in terms of who are the guys who could bury me for not having them. I think it's less likely that AJ Brown against the Jets buries me for not having him. I think it's less likely that Devontae Adams against the Patriots buries me for not having him. Not to say that they can't or won't, but I'm less scared about those guys burying me than the other three.
Yeah, my first kind of inclination when I'm looking at these wide receivers, it's like it's going to be so hard just choosing one. I feel like I want to get in two of these top guys. And I know you had even mentioned that in your building block last week. I think you had Cooper Kupp plus another high-end wide receiver, knowing, hey, most people who are paying up for this are not going to get funneled to getting two guys in. Do you think you'll try to jam some of these duos in together?
I don't see as many opportunities pricing-wise. Last week I was on that Cardinals passing attack block. Although when we get to our building block here on this roster build, we will see there are some ways to go cheap on the starting points. And so, that might actually make more sense than I've been kind of poking around on so far. But hadn't gotten to that point yet to where I've seen that rule popping for myself, but that is an interesting way to go.
A couple situations that I think are interesting. It does feel like we don't have as much value this week as you were kind of hinting at last week. I think I could have made a case for 4 to 5 guys under 4K that would have made sense on different rosters. I'm not quite seeing that this week. Is there any value that you're gravitating to at wide receiver?
A little bit. KJ Osborne, and not that he's super cheap, but KJ Osborne, obviously with the expanded role, like a bigger piece of this pie now. Josh Downs, 4,100. Actually, based on pre-touchdown production, should be priced in kind of the low to mid 5Ks, and he's got Gardner Minshew who can get him the ball. So I think he's an interesting way to go. Curtis Samuel is also another guy who on the season should be priced in the sort of actually mid to high 5Ks based on pre-touchdown production and usage in this offense, but not a great matchup necessarily. Rashid Shaheed is kind of always on the list in terms of this guy can hit for 15 to 20 points and people don't really go out of their way to play him. But nothing that stands out as like, oh, this guy's just super underpriced. So I like Downs. I kind of like Curtis Samuel. I like Michael Wilson. I like Rashid Shaheed. But it's kind of more like, to me, Drake London is underpriced. Jordan Addison's probably underpriced. Christian Kirk is underpriced. So it's kind of when you get up to this 5K range or high 4Ks that things really start to stand out to me.
Any love for Robert Woods if Tank Dell misses, which it sounds like is where we're trending?
The guys who do well against the Saints tend to be route runners. I actually went through the game logs last night of who has done well against the Saints, but it's, guys who can run their curls and run their, slant and outs and the Rams, the Texans are more of like the old Rams, like 95% 11 personnel Rams, or the 49ers, where it's like a lot of crossing routes and a lot of scheming to get guys open, which is just not as effective against the Saints. So it's harder to see a guy having a huge game against the Saints, and then it's harder to see Robert Woods having a huge game. So yeah, I mean, I'm not against Robert Woods. I actually liked John Mechie, but now it looks like Noah Brown will be back this week. And week one, it was, we said after Noah Brown got hurt that he wasn't getting the starting job back once Tank Dell got on the field, but Tank Dell's out. So what do? Do they go back to Noah Brown, Robert Woods, Nico Collins, and say that Mechie's still not ready yet? Or do they think Mechie has shown enough that he's actually on the field more than Noah Brown? So that's question marks there. Then a tough matchup. Then you need the usage to be there. Then you need the points to come. So a lot of guesswork on the Mechie play, but I do kind of like that one. And yeah, I mean, I'm not against Robert Woods, but would I rather have two of the high-priced wide receivers and like two guys like Robert Woods, or would I rather have one of the high-priced wide receivers and like multiples of these 5K guys who can actually go for 25 to 30 points? So that's kind of how I'm leaning. Is I don't want to force value just to get these high-priced guys if that value is kind of topping out at 12 to 15 points.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I talked about that on my portfolio review too. Someone was asking about, pump plays. Are they more viable in the smaller field or the larger field stuff? And we were even pulling up the winning Millie Maker lineup, and they were getting 30-point weeks from all those mid 5K receivers. It was Adam Thielen, DeAndre Hopkins. You go down to the 4K guys. Can they give you salary relief? Can they give you 12 to 14 points? Sure, but it's very unlikely that they're putting up that 30-point week that is winning you $1 million there. So certainly something to consider. Before we do a jump into our DraftKings build here, just wanted to ask you about some of the higher priced secondary wide receivers. I'm guessing both Puka Nacua and Jalen Waddle once again will not be used a ton just because their price tags are pretty crazy. And yet, in the same way we like Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill, these guys are in similarly good spots.
Yeah, the Waddle one is interesting because when are they going to drop this guy's price? Like they don't want to drop his price because then everybody's on him whenever he hits, but he is way overpriced for his role in this offense. It's just that he can go for 30 points. Less interested in Waddle, Puka Nacua very much. I think that he's, I think he gets 9. I think what I said this week was he probably gets 8 to 13 targets and Kupp probably gets 10 to 14. So there's a scenario where Puka has more targets than Cooper Kupp. I think it's going to shake out with him getting a few fewer targets. He's overpriced, but he can also go for 30 points. So yeah, I like Puka this week.
All right, we are going to build a DraftKings lineup here in a second. Thank you, Brandon, for becoming a YouTube member. Reminder, that gets you a few additional perks. You can hop in the Deposit Kingdom Discord and unlock the Hand Builder and Opto Bros channel. You just sync those. There's instructions in the FAQ on how to do so. Great spot to hang out, talk strategy for all of the slates, including the showdowns. And then we'll unlock 2 premium shows each week. You get the DFS After Dark on Saturday nights. Do that at 9 p.m. This week, my guest is Justin Freeman from Run the Sims. Excited to catch up with him. We'll talk a little showdown. And then Sunday morning, 10:45 a.m. Eastern, we do the GPP cram. We'll go over the overnight news, the latest ownership, talk about our favorite GPP plays, all of that good stuff. So you can get all of that for your YouTube membership. But JM, it is now time that everyone waits for. It is time to build a DraftKings lineup. All right, JM, here we are in building a lineup. This one, the Deposit Kingdom Weekly League for week 6. We have 329 of 450 entries filled. This is a rake-free contest. All of the money goes to the prize pool, and this is posted exclusively in the Deposit Kingdom Discord in the announcements section. So hop in there if you want to enter. This will probably fill by tomorrow evening, so get in there while supplies last. JM, similar to last week, other than knowing your cover boy of Ja'Marr Chase, I don't really know where you're leaning on these blocks. So excited to see what direction you're going to take us.
All right, let's have some fun. We're going to go with this super underpriced block of Desmond Ridder, Drake London, and Jonnu Smith. Which,
oh my God, you're coming out hot.
Speaking of Jonnu Smith, speaking of pre-touchdown fantasy points per game, Jonnu Smith 8.9, which basically puts him up in he should be kind of mid 4Ks for pricing at the tight end position. His role has been real. As we said, Drake London's role is real. And this, what are we spending here in salary? We're spending 13.2K in salary. Can we get 60 points, right? Which is over 4x. Yeah, we can get 60 points from this. And so it's a really nice starting point. And if we think that Washington can push the pace in this game, or even if they don't push the pace in this game, they're just able to stop the run, we can certainly have a really nice setup here. So next question I would ask, next question you would probably ask, do we need a bring back here? We don't need a bring back here, but a bring back. We've seen Logan Thomas kind of get the upside. We've seen things split among the running backs. We've seen the Atlanta defense forcing opponents to spread the ball out so that no individual player is having big games. But obviously Curtis Samuel could have a big game. One of the running backs could have a big game, but I would start out on this one with no bring back, because you're basically saying the Falcons could win this game. You know, they could score 3 touchdowns and this is useful. So yeah. And then if I had to bring back, I'd probably go Curtis Samuel first because of the amount of salary it would free up.
I'm just laughing, JM, because this feels like one of the Galaxy Brain blocks that I would roll out there. And this reminds me of when a stand-up comic kind of like alienates his audience right at the top, because part of the appeal is to win them back over through the rest of the set. We're getting question marks in the chat. Dez is laughing. Jared says he won't be duping this one. I like London Baha. So I know we're in a good spot when we've already made the chat this uncomfortable.
You know what? What's my favorite is it's like, this reminds me when I would go on shows with Hefe and Levitan and they'd bring up popular guys and be like, oh, I haven't even thought of that guy this week. And like, I just thought, like, to me, this is a super sharp way to play this week's slate. So yeah, the fact that people like won't even think about it. I love finding spots like that where I'm not going out of my way to be contrarian. I'm just finding what are, in my mind, the sharpest ways to approach this slate. And this is one of them. And then people won't be on it. So yeah, that's a great starting point. And also we can overthink that quarterback position, right? It's $5K in salary is how we could look at it. Where you play $5K guys all the time who that guy doesn't hit, but something that frees up something else on that roster that hits and kind of wins you the tournament. So yeah, I like a starting point like this. And as you see, we can kind of do whatever we want on the rest of the roster because we're going to have a different salary construction. We have a lot more salary to work with, and we're going to have a low owned starting point because people don't understand why you would play Desmond Ridder, Drake London. Desmond Ridder, again, has a 22-pointer, 29-pointer, 31-0 at home between college and the pros, playing at home against the 31st or 32nd ranked pass defense by DVOA, a team that stops the run. So, yeah, it's a good setup here.
Yeah, and I would say, too, I mean, there's lots of reasons this will be unique, but just from kind of like a macro of how people want to play this game is the people who do play this game, I assume they're going to say, Atlanta wants to run the ball. I'll play Bijan. I don't know. Maybe I'll play Dyler Algier. And the Commanders want to throw the ball. So I'll play Sam Howell, I'll play Logan Thomas, any of the receivers like that. So I think already initially you're attacking an already unique game from a unique angle. I assume we'll now get in a high price player. Why don't we save the Curtis Samuel play? If we need it or want it, we can come back to it, but maybe we don't force it here. Who's a high-end guy you want to get in now that we have that flexibility?
Well, I would actually want to go to running back next because I know I'm going to be in the 6K to 7K range. And so then that allows me to see what my salary really looks like. So at running back, we can throw in DeAndre Swift because he's, to me, kind of the more underpriced guy in this pool, high confidence play. And then I'll let you choose among the Raheem Mostert, the Kyron Williams, the Alvin Kamara, I guess we're not going Bijan Robinson. So yeah, among those three guys, kind of pick the one that you want because that might dictate what we do elsewhere on this roster.
Yeah, let me somewhat throw it back to you. I would love to have a Ram on this lineup. And if we're maybe like gravitating to Jamar Chase, then I might say, let's do Kyron Williams. Or maybe you'll tell me, do you like the block of Kyron Williams and Cooper Kupp? Because I do want to have a Ram, and I think I will have a Ram on my main lineup this week.
I don't think I would play the two of them together, not because they can't both go for 30 points, but just because the salary, like it's really restrictive to do that. And then like, what's the upside of them? When I play like a block of players together, I want them to be able to get to that like 3.5 to 4x, but also have those pathways to going to 5x or more, which is harder to see with those two. Having said that, I haven't really thought through the idea of pairing them, but they would need to get to 60 points combined just to get to 4x. So yeah, let's go. We can go basically Kyron Williams, Jamar Chase, or we can go, because if we also say we want a Dolphin, we can go Raheem Mostert, Cooper Kupp. Either one of those would work for me.
Yeah. Do you have a lean on that? That like just my snap thing is that feels pretty close, both those directions.
No, yeah, it feels pretty close both directions. I think that the floor is higher on the Mostert and Kupp one. Like it's going to miss less often
Yeah.
because Cup doesn't get many like 16-point games, and Jamar Chase gets plenty of 16-point games, but it's not that likely to happen against Arizona. So either way, I like the way that it sets up.
Yeah, and you're specifically attacking the weaknesses of those defense. Like you said, you beat Carolina on the ground, and Arizona has been just getting torched through the air as well. So definitely the path of least resistance. And again, we do not have to worry about any kind of chalk or popularity elements after this start there. So I think Mostert and Cup make a ton of sense. That leaves us with 5,100 for a wide receiver, a flex in a defense. Should we check out defense for this week?
Yeah, sure. And it's, it's 49ers and then it's kind of everybody else. If you want to go cheap, a defense that I don't mind, you can pull up the game logs on the Buccaneers and we'll kind of see what, number 2 or number 3 pass defense by DVOA, something like that. Like they've been really good against the pass so far this year. Obviously we know that the Lions are going to run the ball, but Minnesota's a good offense. Got 9 points on the road against them. Chicago is not a great offense, especially at that point, 17 points. Philadelphia is a really good offense. They got 5 points there. New Orleans, a decent offense. They got 13 points there. So this is the kind of spot where 2,300, you can get 5 points, 6 points, but you have the upside for like a 10 to 12 point game if everything comes together. So if we need a save all the way down, that's the defense that I would go to. And I'm not seeing outside of the 49ers, defense kind of my last thing. I hit it on Friday, Saturday, but I'm not seeing anything that pops to me as like, this one could score double digits pretty easily, right? So do you have any defenses like that are really standing out to you? Or
well, it's funny because I'd done one practice build last night and I included the Buccaneers as well. And that was also too, Sam Laporta was looking a little dicey there. Like you said, Jared Goff on the road has not always been super consistent. So the Buccaneers were the defense I had been gravitating to as well. So I like that call.
And then with this, we actually have sort of an interesting salary structure because we do have the ability to go like a KJ Osborne, Jamar Chase, which puts us on Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, which most people won't have. And that's one of the benefits. We can recognize that's one of the major benefits of this starting point is that we kind of get the setup most people won't have. If we had gone with the 49ers defense, then we kind of end up more in the, like that DJ Moore plus Adam Thielen range where both those guys can score 30 points. Thielen's role seems to be really real. So that's always an interesting one. But yeah, that's a way to go. But since we went with a cheap defense, I really like the idea of saying, hey, let's take a Vikings piece because we know that we want to take shots on that Vikings offense. And then we pair it with Jamar Chase. And now we have most people are saying, hey, Cooper Kupp or Jamar Chase or this other high price wide receiver, whereas we're able to get both of them. Right. And sure, people can get thrown off by the Ritter starting point. But when you look at like, we just went through the pre-touchdown fantasy points, right? Like DeAndre Swift is one of the most underpriced players on the slate. Drake London is one of the more underpriced players on the slate. We know that KJ Osborne is underpriced for this new role or this new piece of the pie that he has. Allows us to fit in Jamar Chase and Cooper Kupp together. Raheem Mostert with all the ceiling attached to that Miami offense. So yeah, I'm glad that people don't want to dupe this one because I like this roster. I like the way that I like what you can do with kind of this different starting point this week. And obviously, if you didn't like this specifically, you could kind of move around a piece and get up to Matthew Stafford and pair that with your Cooper Kupp, or get up to Joe Burrow and pair that with your Jamar Chase. But it kind of shows the flexibility that we have on something like this.
Right, because you even mentioned that, like, if you wanted to go up to Matthew Stafford, and then how much? I guess then the Curtis Samuel, that doesn't quite
Curtis
work.
Samuel's just barely off, but like, you can move around pieces. You can go from Mostert down to somebody, or you got Jonathan Mingo at 3,500, who's 5 to 8 snaps in every game so far this year. So there's things that you can do to kind of make this salary work for different constructions, but we get to have fun with a Desmond Ridder starting point on one of our rosters.
Yeah, I like this. And this is basically structurally similar to what I was kind of trying to do last week with my main lineup, where I'm getting in all the plays I like. And then you got to do, what a blender would call a vomit stack, the stack no one wants to do. But when it does hit, and you do generally have the safety net of a rushing floor. And we've seen Ridder run, Daniel Jones. Obviously it didn't happen. That offense just cratered last week, but that's why they're priced at these places, because it can crater. But the upside scenario is there. Like I mentioned, if you guys want to get in the Deposit Kingdom Weekly League, the contest is posted in the Discord. Couple other things. I'm going to be immediately following this, headed over to the Underdog Daily channel. The redirect is set here. So if you just want to refresh, you will magically see myself and the Badge Bros walking through the Underdog Week 6 slate. We'll talk Battle Royale strategy, maybe hop in a dog bowl draft, build a pick 'em, all that good stuff. So you can keep it rolling with off and on the clock. And one other thing I did want to just plug, on my personal newsletter this week, the PO Box, it's a free newsletter. There's a lot of people who were bummed out this week, JM, with all the injuries, with Achan and Richardson and Connor and Justin Jefferson really piling up. And so just did a little thing about how we think about sweating our teams, how we think about tilting it. So if you've been down in the dumps, I think you might enjoy reading that, just to put some perspective on things and maybe reframe your thinking headed into week 6. But Jan, before we get out of here, any final words for you?
I'm excited for you to get your yoga pants. I'll send you the link, and
yeah, please do.
We can merino wool ribbed yoga pant our show together.
That's right. If I win a tournament this week, I will buy multiple pairs of the JM pants there.
I like it.
Vaguely pornographic to the point he didn't even on screen.
Yeah, we're going to get shipped over from Lithuania, so you got a little bit of a wait, but they'll come eventually.
There you guys go. Get signed up over at 1 Week Season. Use that promo code Pete30 to get your 30% off, and JM will be getting all of that action up before he stuffs his face with pizza night on Friday. Appreciate all you guys hanging out in the chat. Apologies again for my snafu with the timing on it, and you guys all hanging out an hour early. I appreciate you. I'll be back tomorrow night for DFS After Dark with Justin Freeman, and I'm headed over to the Underdog Daily channel right now. We'll see you guys soon. Good luck in week 6.